Good time of the day, everyone, whenever you are. Welcome to Los Angeles Data Platform User Group. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Steve, and I'll be host and moderator of this virtual meeting. I'll be joined by Yelena, and Yelena she'll take care of the digital truffle as well as other things. If you're joining us for the first time and trying to find upcoming meetups, you can use Eventbrite or Meetup, or you can send us also an email. All the links in the PowerPoint are clickable. If you're trying to see more content from us, here's all the social media touch points with content being published to YouTube or Rumble, with upcoming meetings or other content you can find on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and others. And also you can join our mailing list and you'll get notifications, upcoming meetings, reminders on the content that is available, as well as our weekly newsletter. And this event is sponsored by Data-Driven Technologies. That's the company behind, organization behind LA Data Platform User Group, as well as our mega once-a-year event called SQL Summit in Los Angeles, which, by the way, is going to be on June 10th, 2023. It's also sponsored by Microsoft SolarWinds. And for people who don't know SolarWinds, they own SQL Sentry now, so some people know SQL Sentry but don't know SolarWinds. It's essentially performance tuning as well as other things. And at the end of this meeting, we'll be raffling custom t-shirt. You can go ahead and scan the QR code or follow the link to enter your name. With few disclaimers, we might not have the exact color. We're not going to be able to ship it outside of US, and you must be present to win. And during this presentation, please feel free to drop questions into chat. And without further ado, let's move to the rock stars of today's online meeting. Michelle, Christian, please take it away and introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen, if you don't mind.
Yep. Sure.
Okay. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Not yet.
No?
Not yet.
Really? Okay, just a second.
Now we see it.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So hi everybody. Today it's Christian and myself, and we're going to talk about the power of the Synapse SQL pools. So we're going to talk about the different flavors of the Synapse SQL pools, and let us introduce ourselves. Christian?
Yes, my name is Christian Cote. I'm French. You're going to hear it by my accent. I'm a data engineer, solution architect for many years now, various data warehousing experience. I wrote several books, one with Michel a few years ago. And I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP for the past 14 years. And with Michel, I'm the co-organizer of the Montreal Data Platform User Group in Montreal. Michel, you won.
Yes. So my name is Michelle Gutzait, and pretty much like Christian, I'm a data engineer and solution architect. I work at EPAM, which is a global company that does development, databases, basically everything. I do have a lot of experience. So Christian is coming more from the big data background, and I'm coming more from the database and data warehouse experience, but mostly databases, also from different industries. I have 35 years experience in IT and over 25 years in SQL Server. So I started with the SQL Server when it basically started, when it was like just a little baby. And I saw it grow up and be the beautiful product that it is right now. And I also write blogs, and with Christian Cote, I'm the co-organizer of the Montreal Users Group, and I'm also MVP for the last 3 years. So nice meeting you all. Let's talk about our agenda today. So in order to talk about the Azure Synapse SQL pools, we're going to introduce you into the architecture, mostly discuss what is the underlying architecture, and also to understand the demos that are going to be relying on that architecture. We're going to talk a little bit about Azure Synapse Studio that we're using. We're going to talk about, and then we're going to do to talk about the serverless pool and the SQL dedicated pool. And we're going to, at the end, we're going to compare between the two to see when are the good use cases to use serverless versus dedicated pool. Any questions so far?
I guess we're good.
So,
right.
Christian.
Yes, the Data Lakehouse here, right? So why are we there? Why are we talking about the Data Lakehouse? At the beginning of I would say late 1980s, beginning of the 2000s, we're doing data warehouses, right? So we copy the data from line of business systems, and where we had ETL process that was copying this data into data marts for analytics per process, right? So data marts help you to basically you want to compare the sales from this year versus last year. It's not that easy when you do it in SQL. Although now we have good functions, but we had a lot of user-defined functions that can help, or SQL native functions. But at the time, we didn't have a lot. It was a lot of. It was a nightmare. So that's why we copy the data into what we call a data mart. We're going to show you later what is a data mart. And then after that, we were able to do some analytics and reports on top of it. So BI for business intelligence, so analytics. But the problem with that is that how many times I've been asked at the time to extract the data from PDF, a PDF file, right? It's not it's not tabular format much. I can have a table, but I can have a lot of text on top of it, or a Word document. So the technology we use were not very, I would say, appropriate for those kind of sources. So we adopted at the beginning of the 2010s the data lake. So the data lake allows us to store files, basically. So it's schema on write. I'm sorry, it's schema on read. So we simply store the files, and we decide later what we're going to do with it. So basically, we had to use the file. We had to we're able to use a lot of processes like Hadoop or all of these nice things to be able to extract the data from those files. But the thing is, data warehouse is schema on the write, so it means that you need to know what you're doing before you write the data. Data lake is schema on read, which means that you don't need to know what you want to do with the data. We just need to put it into a storage somewhere, and the analyst will have to figure out what he wants to do with it. So that format was not very, the data lake wasn't very good for end users. So what has been developed, I mean, by a major company like Databricks, and has been adopted by a lot of people now, is a data lakehouse. So the lakehouse is a combination of the warehouse and the data lake. So what it gives you is that you have the flexibility of the data lake, but at the same time you allow ETL processes to do BI on top of your data lake. Michelle is going to show you a slide that explains this process a bit more. So the lakehouse is something that now every major companies are talking about. This is the evolution of data warehouse and the data lake. Is it right?
So just to get into the architecture, we're trying to simplify the architecture. So what we're talking about is we're talking about the data lakehouse, but we also have the component of the data lake. So the idea is that we have on the left, for example, it's just an example. Obviously, we can have different data sources. We have a SQL database, could be on Azure or could be on-prem. And then we would have a pipeline that is going to move the data into the data lake. And on the data lake, think about the data lake storage as a directory or a folder. So the concept is that we have the data lake as, let's call it like a storage array. Underneath, we have a container, which we can have different containers. Underneath, we can have different folders. For example, for if we think about a database, it could be a folder for the database or a folder for whatever the business requires. It's easy to understand when we have, for example, in the source, we have the sales LT database, SQL database, and we have the address table. It's easy to understand that we're moving to a container. And then underneath, we have the sales folder. Underneath, we will have the address folder. And underneath, we will have the files with the data. And later on, we will see how we are using Synapse Analytics to actually read that data. Basically, the formats we need. So there are a lot of. So this is a basic presentation. But there are methodologies on how to create and format the data lake properly for performance and for other, just to be organized. We're not going to get into this today. So just to simplify, we have source, pipeline, and the actual files underneath. So those files, you have data. It can be deltas, it can be anything. So we will see later that with Synapse, we will be able to see either the data in one file or the data in multiple files. And the formats that we have are those: Avro, binary, delimited text, JSON. We are going to work more with Parquet, and Christiane is going to explain later why we prefer Parquet, even though other formats are also available, especially with the serverless. Any questions here? So I'm going to go one step forward. So once we have the data in the data lake storage and in the container, in the folders, in the files, we can simply use Azure Synapse Analytics to point Synapse Analytics to that either file or folder. And by just using T-SQL or SQL, we can extract the data, we can query the data right away. So imagine the process is very easy. You just have to have an ETL, move the data to the data lake, to the right folder, and then you just just open the Synapse. We're going to see this in the demo. Point yourself to either the file or the folder and query the data. Let's talk about the data lakehouse architecture. So I know we talked about the data lake where you could just place the files, but the data lakes architecture is more construct. So on the left side, we have the data sources. And as you can see, we're talking about 3 different layers. So the idea is that the first layer, so let's say that you have a lot of data sources. Let's say you have Oracle, you have SQL Server, you have RDBMS databases, you have text files, you have CSVs, you have other NoSQL databases. And so the idea is that the bronze layer, which is the raw data, you're just going to move the data raw as it is. So you're going to place this there, but then something needs to be done with that data because you just have lots of files, lots of data. Obviously, it's organized in a way, but you would like to make sure when you were talking about the data lakehouse, we would like to be able to query the data in a manner where we can do joins between the data. We can see different components of the data together. just as a very simple example, let's say that we have source system with what we call customer information, and we have another source system from a different vendor where it's called client, and we would like to make sure that we're seeing the same client or customer as one, because from the business perspective, it's the same entity. So from the source system, it's not the same entity because it's a different system, but from the business it is. So we need another layer, which is the silver layer, where we take the data from the bronze, we manipulate the data, we validate or reject the data, and then we create that layer where it's more, I would say, more cleaned, the data. So we can have, depending on your implementation, we can have a validated and cleaned zone and rejected zone. And then there would be probably a data steward looking at the rejected data and deciding what to do with that data, either remove the data or ignore the data, or go back and look at the validation and make sure that that data will be also integrated into the silver layer. So those are the mandatory layers in the data lake. But the gold layer is, if we talk about what we know, is the star schema or that model, the denormalized model, where it's better for the business to look at the data the way the business needs to view the data. So it's not going to be normalized. So we have the facts and dimensions. And then we can create the reports more easily, because we don't have to go back here and do multiple joins to get one component of the data. And we're going to see this in the demo. And then, of course, after so those are the basic concepts. Obviously, for your implementation, you can have more or less components, and then you can even push data. Let's say if we're talking about Power BI Premium, you can push data from the gold layer into Power BI, and it will be like a second gold layer, or it could be the gold layer for you, depending on your implementation, so that the business can actually manipulate the data or query the data with reports. Christian, do you have anything else to add?
No, just to refer to the data lakehouse definition that we were talking before, bronze will be your schema on read, right? So you simply push the data there, as Michelle told before. You don't transform it. You start applying a schema in the silver zone, and the consumable schema, the consumption zone, right, where you can do your analytics, will be in the gold zone. Where the end users could do their report on the gold zone. The silver is more for the power user, or the business analyst or data steward.
Yes. So, however, I've seen organizations where they wanted to stop at the silver layer because they wanted to be as close as possible to the source systems, right? So it really depends.
Analytics, right? If you do analytics, you need the gold layer. So we have a question in the chat. What
Can you read the question?
What tools? Yeah, what is the tool used to move data from the bronze, silver, and finally the gold? It might be, if you in Azure, it might be Data Factory. It might be Synapse Spark, or it might be Databricks. It might even be Azure Function if you don't have a lot of data or a lot of transformations. And is the gold zone equivalent to a semantic layer? Yes and no, because you have real structure there, and it might be a semantic layer if it's a view. It might be views on top of your silver, if you don't have a lot of business transformation to do. Because from bronze to silver, you're doing your system transformation, right? You apply the right data types. You will validate the dates and stuff like these. But from the silver to gold, you're going to apply the business logic for your analytics zone. So this is why the gold, it might be views if it's your business logic, or your transformations are not too complex. But usually for performance, we prefer to have structure there. And sometimes the gold might be a zone in the lake, or it might be a database too. So it cannot be views much.
Mm-hmm. Next.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So now let's talk about Synapse Analytic Workspace. So we talked about the data lake storage, and now once you spin up Synapse Workspace, it comes with 3 different engines. You have the default engine, which is the Serverless SQL Pool, and you have the Dedicated SQL Pool and the Spark Pool. So in this presentation, we're going to refer to the 2 SQL Pool. And the look and feel of those 2 are very close to a SQL Server database, but with a little bit less functionality, but a lot of power. So basically, when you use the serverless pool is an engine, but it doesn't have data files. It doesn't have databases. It points directly to the data lake via external tables or views. So you query the files or the folders directly, and this is how you get your data. And then with Dedicated Pool, it's another engine for analytics, but it's a little bit more sophisticated, and we're going to talk about it later. And now, Christian, you're going to talk about the Delta format.
Yeah, the data format. Yeah, okay. The Parquet form. Michel talked before about the Parquet format, which is a columnar format, meaning that a CSV file per se, it's every time you read a column into a CSV file, you need to read all of the row, right? So if you're familiar with the column store indexes, cluster column store indexes that we have with the SQL Server, the Delta format is compressed by column. So if you query 1 or 2 columns, what will happen is that it's going to read only those 2 columns, as opposed to the CSV file, it will read the entire row. So if you have 50 columns in your file, it's going to read the 50 columns, and then it's going to read the line entirely to find out, to filter the 2 columns at some point. So the Parquet format is a columnar format. What they did with the Delta format, they added a log on top of the Parquet format. So it's like a database in the lake. It allows us to have asset transformation on Spark, right? Serializable isolation levels, and we never see inconsistent data. It's very scalable. So because Spark is a distributed engine, so you have one or more machines. So when you create those tables, it's very scalable. When you read them using Spark, it's very scalable too. But what happened is that with the serverless pool, now they are able to read this format natively. They are able to parse the log file to find the information we want. And so you have the schema enforcement, of course, because now it becomes a table. When we talk about Delta, we're going to talk about Delta tables. Now it becomes a table, it becomes a database, but on the data lake. But sometimes it's referred as a Delta Lake. Here you have one thing. The last part is the time travel. Time travel is very important because you're able to check the data as it was the last time you loaded. So if you have any data quality issue for some reason, you can always go back to the last version that you had. So this is very powerful.
And also you can with time travel, you can understand what was the data a week ago, right? So if you have this type of implementation, this is also and Christiana, I do have a question for the sake of the topic. Why can we use this instead of a relational database? Because you have ACID transactions.
Yeah, in theory you could. In theory you could use it instead of a relational database, but it's not meant because you can have deadlocks there too, right? So you can have if you have too many reads and write at the same time, you will need to increase your compute big time. It's not a relational database. It's simply a helper for analytics. When you do analytics, when you do query with a star schema, it's mainly when you read the data. You have ACID transaction, but I would not build my my CRM on top of it, or my ERP
and also,
on top of it.
you can get a lot of fragmentation, right? If you use a lot of transactions.
Yep.
Awesome. So in our demos, we're going to use Azure Synapse Studio. I'm going to just park this topic here. We're going to talk about it later, a little bit more later. So let's start with the with the serverless pool. This is the component. So we do have the data in the data lake storage. And then when we spin up Synapse Workspace, we have the serverless SQL pool by default. It's the engine. It's the cheapest engine of the Synapse Workspace. So it's a cheap solution. Both the data lake storage and the serverless pool are cheaper solutions. It's very quick to implement because once you have the data in the storage, in the data lake storage, you just point your serverless SQL pool and you create either an external table or a view, and right away you can start querying the data. It also has an okay performance, so it really depending on your implementation. Let's say that you have a few millions of rows in the tables and you want to do some joins. It has an okay performance. What does it mean? It means, just to give you an example from an implementation that I did at the client, they had tables with around 40 million rows, and we had to join something like 5 tables. So on SQL Server, the report was running for 15 minutes, so 15. And on the serverless, it was running for 39 seconds. So this is the okay performance, but as you increase the amounts of data, you may not get a performance that is satisfying for you, and really also depending on your business logic. If you need to do some very crazy implementations, you may need to consider to move to the dedicated SQL pool that Christian is going to talk about later. It also has, because it doesn't have databases, so there's no TempDB, it has very limited T-SQL and SQL capabilities. So just to give you an example, I tried to create a view that is doing group by, and this is, for example, a functionality that doesn't exist in the serverless SQL pool. So you need to find better ways to do this. Either, for example, create a pipeline. You can create pipelines reading data from via serverless SQL pool and transforming the data and placing the data in another folder, for example, or in another container on the data lake storage. But it still looks like a SQL Server. So if you have users that used to run Excel or Power BI or even Tableau or just doing ad hoc queries, they will find this very close to their skill set. They don't have to learn new skill sets. And you can even connect to that using SSMS or Visual Studio because it has a SQL Server-like interface or an endpoint.
Yeah, and not to mention it's very cheap, right? You mentioned it at the past. It's something like $5 USD per terabyte.
Per terabyte, yes.
Yeah, I say $6 because I'm Canadian. But
and also the data lake storage is very cheap, and you have different layers in the data lake storage. So you have the hot, the cold, and the archive, and this allows you, for example, if your implementation doesn't require to have the all the data in the hot storage, you can basically move it to the other layers that are even cheaper.
Yeah, the thing is, it's really good when I say cheap solution because you can connect your Power BI refreshers that refreshes every hour on this, right? Because if it takes 20 minutes to refresh your Power BI, that's very good. So it's okay because you refresh it 1 per hour and you don't constrain your database that is used by other users.
Exactly.
So very good solution for it. Yeah,
exactly, because it's distributed, so you don't have the locks, blocks, and deadlocks that you would have on a database, right?
We'll talk about that later, Michelle.
Yes, I know. Trying to make it interesting.
I know.
So how does it work? Very simplified architecture. like we said before, we have the data lake storage, we have the folder for the table, and we have the different files. And then you have the Synapse serverless pool. You point your either external table or a view to the folder or a specific file. And from the client perspective, they just see a select from, with joins and everything that you need. Even group by, but not in a view. So let's do a little demo just to get the feel of the serverless pool. So in the demo, let's say that we have the operational data and we have a lot of tables, right? So this would be the bronze layer, right? The massage data. And on the right, we have the gold layer where you have the denormalized, the star schema. And so if you don't want to pay for dedicated SQL pool and you don't need to fancy schmancy implementations, you can basically use even the Synapse, the serverless pool, to create this by using even views. So you point your serverless into the tables as external tables or views, and then on top of that you can create a view to get, for example, the DIM product. So this is something that we're going to see now in the demo. Let's move to the demo.
You can do it when your transformation are not too complex.
Exactly. So if you have complex, but even if they're complex, you can still use the pipelines to query the data from using the serverless, right? You can still massage the data, but you're going to talk about the dedicated pool to see what else can we do.
Yep.
So in this demo, we already have the data in the storage, and we have the Synapse serverless. So this is the Synapse Analytics. And as you can see here, when you open the Synapse Analytics, you can see here that you have the dedicated SQL endpoint that Christian is going to talk about, the dedicated pool. And you also have the serverless endpoint. So you can copy this to the clipboard, and you can open SSMS and connect to it as if it was a SQL Server environment. And another thing but basically we talked about the Azure Studio, and so in this case we're going to open the Synapse Studio. Okay, so I'm going to open this.
Just a word of caution about Azure Synapse Studio. This is it's using the HTTPS protocol, so it means that it's not suitable for large results. So that's why you're going to use SSMS or Azure Data Studio.
Correct. So in Synapse Studio, we have the data. So here we have two types of data. We have the linked, and here you will see the Azure Data Lake storage. So here what you see is the storage that we have created. I think it's this one, right, Christian? I don't remember.
No, the first one.
The first one. Okay, so on this, we created the containers, that are the raw and the gold, right? And you can create a lot more, but basically you have to organize it in a way that your business wants. For this presentation, we just placed the Parquet files of each table on the main the root directory, we can call it. So you have those files, okay? Basically, if you had a directory, you could just right-click on the directory. So I'm going to show you. You right-click on a file, and then you can either query the rows directly, or you can create an external table. So we already created external table. So let's just do an experiment. We create an external table. There are some limitations with the data types. I'm going to show. I hope it's not because I have to reconnect.
I don't think so.
Okay.
If you arrive there, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, you can preview the data and you can decide what is the max string length. The limitation that we have is 4,000 here because it's a table. And then we decide what is the name of the table. So let's say I can call it address. And I can either create it automatically or using a script. I like to use a script because I would like to show. And I forgot to show that it was in the sales database, and this is a serverless database. So when you can create as many, like few or as many as you wish serverless databases. So you can give the script a name, and basically, if you publish it, you're going to see it in the script repository, if this is the way you work, or you can connect this to GitHub or DevOps. So what do we see here? We see here it will create the format of Parquet if it doesn't exist, and it will create the data source, which is the storage, the location that we've chosen, and then it will create the external table in the specific location. So in our case, it's going to be a file, but if it's a directory, you may see something that looks like this, okay, without the Parquet. In this case, we're just creating this. So if you right-clicked on a directory, it's going to show you the place of the directory. And then, as you can see here, it gives me, so it reads the Parquet files, but it doesn't not always understand the exact data types. So you can, for example, you can say, okay, I would like to have this will be varchar, I don't know, 100 or whatever you want. And then you make sure that you're in the right database. Okay, you choose your database, and then you just run it and you create a table. So I will have the table address. So we already did that. If I go to the workspace itself, I'm going to open the SQL database, and I have my sales here. And you will see the external tables that we have. Well, I did not create the address. I can create it, but we have those tables. If I can, for example, run this. So at the end, it's going to show me the first 100. So it created. Here, I just have to do refresh, and I will see my address here. Okay, and I can right-click, and I can select top 100 rows, and I will get that. So it's like I have to run it, and then I will see the 100 rows as if it was a SQL table, but it's querying the file directly. Okay, so now that we have this, if you remember the schema in the presentation, I would like to create from this, I would like to create a view that is going to show me the dimension. So what I can do, I can either create it here, or I can go to SSMS. So here I'm connected to the link that you saw before that I shared, right? So that I've shown in Synapse. So it's the endpoint to the serverless. I open the database. I see my sales database. I see my tables. Let's see if the address is going to be there. So external tables.
Michelle,
yes.
Michelle, can you show how you can connect to the Serverless Pool? How you connect to it? Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So okay. So if we go back here, we go here. Yeah. Okay. So the serverless, I copy the serverless link. Copied. I go to SSMS. I paste, and then I connect.
And then you choose Active Directory with MFA, right? With the multi-factor authentication. And we didn't show it now, but what would happen is that the first time you connect, you open a session, it's going to ask you for your password for your email. Because you're part of the Active Directory. Michelle is part of the Active Directory. So it's going to validate her email address and password. And if we have multi-factor authentication, she's going to apply the multi-factor authentication with her phone or with a text code.
So there are multiple ways to connect, right? So if you're going that deep, so you have different, you can do Active Directory, In this case, we use the MFA, but you can use the Active Directory if you replicate your Active Directory from on site.
That will not work because we use MFA most of the time now.
We're using MFA, yes, but these are the ways to connect. Okay, so it just okay. So this is the address. So basically what I can do, I can select the top 1,000 and you will see it's the same. Right now I'm connecting to Synapse and I see the data from Synapse. It's the same for any other table. I created a view, so I just wanted to show you. Let's script the view. And this view is basically creating the DIM product. So instead of creating the data, I'm just querying the data via the view. So it's doing the right. So you can see it's like any other SQL, and it's just querying the data with a lot of joins. So if your dimension, for example, is very easy to create this way, you can still do this. I can even select. Let's say select. So let's look at the performance. You see, it's so we don't have a lot of data, but you need to verify that the performance is satisfying enough. But you can see that this is very fast. Any questions so far?
No, I'm answering the chat window.
Okay.
We are asking. I think Irina asked for the port that we are using. We're using the port 1433. But I was about to answer that since we're connecting to the web, right, to Azure, of course, the port TCP, you have to have access to the port, the TCP port 80 and 443. Okay,
great. So what I've shown, we have the different tables to create the DIM product, and the view is basically the DIM product. This is what I've shown so far. Okay, so let's summarize. We still have some constraints. So remember that we're pointing directly into the file. So the only performance improvement that we can have is that we can partition the data in the data lake hierarchical data lake. We can partition by one column, but we cannot create indexes like we would do on a database. So that means that this implementation is good when you're scanning high volume of data and not for potentially not for specific row that you would like to fetch. And so also the limited functionality, so no temp tables, very limited. So you can create a temp table, but you cannot do anything with it. No group by in views and stuff like that. So you do have, Microsoft has documentation regarding the constraints with Synapse Serverless, what you can or cannot do. Christian was talking about sliding dimension type 2, but you're going to talk about it a little bit more. So that means that we have like time travel. We don't have this ability with the serverless because you're going to explain that later. So no sliding dimension. And you can still average the Delta Lake, but the performance will be slower than a database when we're talking about updates. So we can still use it as if it was like updating with the Delta Lake, but it will be much slower than a database. So that's not recommended. It's more for analytics.
Yeah, but you cannot update because the Serverless Pool is read-only. Yeah? So when you talk about updating, you're talking about updating in Spark or in the other processes.
Yes, I was or the pipelines, right?
yeah, okay, that's fine.
Yes,
that's fine.
So it's important. If I was not clear, Synapse is only pointing to the data. It's only for reads. You cannot write through that.
Yep, the Serverless Pool, yes.
Okay, so why would we use the Serverless Pool? So it should be part of any data lakehouse because let's say that you need to just look at the data. So it's very, as you can see, when you have the data in the data lake, you just create an external table or a view, and you can just analyze the data. You can do manipulations, like joins and stuff like that, and you can understand your data fast. So this is fast for an analysis. So let's say that you have a very complicated report and you're not sure where to start, or if you need a dedicated pool, you can just use the serverless pool, look at your data, you know, like join and do like query the data and understand what you have. It's also very, very powerful and not expensive because it doesn't have, you don't have to duplicate the data. You point to the data and that's it. It also, in a way, really depending on your implementation, let's say that you have complicated reports. You can, instead of, for example, in some cases, instead of creating like complicated pipelines, you can just use views. You can just use views on top of views with the serverless, really depending on your implementation and the performance that you're expecting. You can actually reduce the number of pipelines that you would have. You can also have pipelines querying directly from Synapse with joins and whatever you need. And again, I've shown that once you have the endpoint, like for example from SSMS, you can connect it as if it was a SQL Server engine.
Yeah, the various flavors of serverless. Michel showed you before that briefly that you have the serverless database, so under the SQL, but you might also have noticed that you have the Lake database. So the Lake database is basically, Michel explained to you what was the serverless SQL database, right? So it's basically SQL queries at some point, and external table, but Microsoft is working on the Lake databases that are more Spark oriented. So if you use Spark, which is a distribution engine that use compute, we don't talk Spark much into this presentation, but if you use Spark, you can create Lake databases that can be consumed by the serverless pool after. So the reason for that is that you want to be able to leverage you want to do some ETL, right? Because Michel told you can do views on top of views on top of views, but that will become messy at the end of the day. So you want to have, like someone asked me in the chat, I think Vladimir, you want to have a real dimension at some point for performance. So you're going to do the ETL in Spark, and you're going to design your Lake database using the designer that comes with Synapse. And then after that, you can expose the CSV file, the Parquet file, Delta Lake format after that into the serverless pool. So it's a combination of both of them. So you can query your Lake database using Spark. You can query also your Lake database using SQL. But we don't have for the Lake, we don't have any designer tool like ERWin, like Power Designer, or even Visio at the time to design our database. So Synapse with the Lake database, they give us those designers.
Okay, and how the data can be consumed. Again, different tools. The main ones are SSMS, Power BI. You can consume the data via the Spark pool and Azure SQL Database as external tables. And now I'm going to unshare my screen, and you going to share your screen. Yes.
Where's my screen? Let me just go to the slide where you were. The SQL Dedicated Pool. Presentation mode. Okay. Perfect. Okay. All right.
Christian, there is a question from Vlad about Power BI.
Yeah.
Can you use live query in Power BI?
Live query, yes, you can. Direct query. It's going to be direct query with Power BI. So
you just connect to Synapse.
Yeah. But with the serverless pool, you can use live query for data that is streaming at some point, because you don't want to. You just need to ingest the data into the Lake. Not much transformation. like stock market-based data, you can do it with the serverless pool. But any data can be, because you see Michel use an endpoint before to connect with SSMS. So you use the same endpoint in Power BI. You have the choice to do direct query, or you can import your data.
So I've done this implementation for a client, and it was pretty fast. But again, they had millions of rows, not more than that.
In direct query?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So serverless versus the dedicated pool. So the difference that we have here is that with the dedicated pool, you just do something here. Perfect. So the dedicated pool and serverless pool are both distribution mechanism. One, the dedicated pool, we can control the number of the concurrency that we have. We can control the size of our machines. Serverless pool, we don't control it. So this is, whoops, perfect, here. So what will happen is that here, we're going to connect to a control node, the same thing here. And then after that, we're going to use MPP engines here in the serverless pool to connect to the compute node. Almost the same thing here, but it's a distributed query processing engine, which is a bit different because you don't have real compute. You are sharing compute with others here. Your data is not shared, but you're sharing compute with others. So it's serverless. It's like, you know, here it's like platform as a service here. It's software as a service here. PaaS versus SaaS at some point. So here with you can control. On the other side, you cannot control. So when we talk about the dedicated pool, we're talking about data warehouse units. So as I mentioned before, with data warehouse, with the dedicated pool, I'm sorry, because Synapse, the dedicated pool was called Azure Data Warehouse before. So they rename it with Synapse. So that's why sometimes we confuse data warehouse. So with Synapse, the dedicated pool, you have a collection of resources like DWU is a unit that is CPU, memory, IO, and concurrency capabilities. It starts with 100 DWUs and goes up to 30,000 DWUs. So 100 will cost you something like, I don't know, maybe $1,000 per month, something like that. 30,000 will cost you $500,000. So, but you have a lot of power here. But when I talk about those numbers, this money, the one thing that you can do with the pool, you can pause it. You pause it, so you don't pay any compute, and then you resume it after when you need it. Sometimes we use it because we have some ETL processes that run during the night, let's say between 1 and 2 a.m. We're going to resume our the dedicated pool, and then after that we're going to do our ETLs. Once we're done, we pause our ETL, the dedicated pool here, and we're going to resume it at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. when people arrive. And you can, when you pause it, you can also change the number of DWUs that you are using. Let's say that during the day you want to use 300 DWUs, but during the night for your ETL process you want it fast, you might use 6,000 DWUs, but only for 1 hour. So you have the complete control over the compute here. So how it differs from another database? You see, as regular database, let me use the laser pointer here. Perfect. That's a laser pointer. Perfect. Here, okay. SMP, right? Symmetric multiprocessing. So they share the same memory. They share the same disk. We might argue that with a SAN, you might have multiple disks, but at some point they share the same set of CPUs. With massively parallel processing, what will happen is that you have your name nodes here and you have your worker nodes. So it's going to distribute the work to many workers. When you create one database and with using the SQL, the SQL dedicated pool, it's going to create 60 databases underneath. So you have up to 60 distribution. So this is why it's more expensive, but you have a lot of advantages to it. Like the biggest one is improve query performance. Michel, they didn't query much before, but sometimes you had a query, Michel, that ran from 5 to 15 seconds, something like that, right? So with the Dedicated Pool, the performance is always the same. If it takes 1 second, it will always take 1 second. And it's very, and you control the compute power of it. As I mentioned, it can be passed to save cost. It's optimized for a star schema, as opposed to the serverless pool that is optimized for almost anything. I mean, it's not optimized for something in particular, right? You can query a CSV file like you can query a Parquet file. It's going to be faster with a Parquet file, but because of the nature of the file, right, compressed by column, a CSV file might take 10 megs. A Parquet file would take 1 meg for the same data. But with with the SQL, the SQL pool is optimized for star schema. So, and data is stored relational table. So it's very optimized as a storage. So, and everything is compressed. So you reduce the storage cost here. It's compressed because we're using the columnar storage here, cluster column store indexes.
We have a question here.
Yes.
Do they offer auto scale for the dedicated pool?
No. You don't have auto scale. Microsoft is working on that because this is something that we ask as MVPs for the past few years, right? Give us a range, like with Databricks or with Spark, SQL in Spark, I would say you're able to say between 1 and 3 nodes, right? Between 1 and 20 and 15 nodes. So it's going to auto scale by itself. It's going to start machines, right, on demand. In that case, no. In that case, you cannot auto scale. But this is something that Microsoft is looking at. So this is a star schema here. So you have fast queries here because the optimizer of the SQL pool will understand that type of schema. It's made for it, right? And the query will return in seconds, if not milliseconds, with large volumes in a consistent manner. And you also have more Azure SQL, like like you have Michel told you about the limitation that you had. Now with this, now you have the role-level security. Michel, help me here because you are more on the database side.
Exactly. So this is like we have in SQL Server. So the role-level security means that you can configure the security in a way that, for example, each department will see their own data in the same table, exactly the same as SQL Server. You have the column data masking, so basically you can decide which users are going to see your SSN as XXX rather than the real number. Again, exactly like you have it in SQL Server. You also have the transparent data encryption, which encrypts the files, the database files, the backups, so that if anyone gets a hold of your files, they will not be able to do anything with them. So that's also the same as SQL Server. So that's encryption at at rest. Yes. You also have with that, because it's some kind of a database engine. It has data, so you have a vulnerability assessment, which is a service that Microsoft provides. It's like looking at the security best practices and telling you what you're doing wrong. For example, don't use DSA, or you don't have strong passwords. The configuration has some gaps and stuff like that. Exactly like with the SQL Server and the Azure SQL Database. And then you have something that is more advanced and more expensive, which is advanced threat protection. It's an online service that is looking at the unusual activity in your environment. So, for example, if you have SQL injection or applications that never connected before, or a lot of attempts to to use a specific login, a strong login or password. So it notifies you. So this is a service that you also have in Azure. And then the data discovery and classification, Christian?
Yeah, it's more on the data warehouse side, this kind of thing. Basically, data discovery and classification. You can catalog your data up to a point. We have it in Azure SQL. We had it in SQL Server 2016, if I remember well. So basically, you can say the data that we have in this column is sales data. Or you can say this is sensitive data versus non-sensitive data here. This is used in conjunction with Purview. Purview offers much more capability than what we have, but here we have the basic data discovery and classification. If you don't want to use Purview, Purview is a service which is a data catalog that is that can be used to lead to basically, it's going to read the data that you have, and you can have multiple definitions for same column, depending if it's you might say it's used by the data owner is the accounting department here, and the data that I have here is for my GL.
And you can also see the lineage, right? So what happens to a column since it comes from the stores through the pipelines and all the way to the data warehouse. You can see what is the lineage of that column. And by the way, everything that we've shown in the previous slide, you can find there's a lot of documentation around what are the options and how to do that.
Yep. So I told you before that we have distributions, right? So we have 60 databases underneath. When you create a database, you create 60. The goal of it is to have parallelism. You want to be able to distribute your data into those 60 databases and make sure that that is distributed as evenly as possible, or up in an optimized way, to make sure that when you retrieve the data doesn't move from one disk to the other, one machine to the other. You want to make sure that you don't want they call it data shuffling. You want to avoid the shuffling because this is where you lose time when you read your data. So we have three types of distribution. We have the round robin, the hash distribution, and the replicate. So basically, the round robin distribution, what it will do, it will try, if you have enough volumes, it will distribute your data equally on the 60 distribution. So what it's going to do, it's going to take your data without much knowledge. It will take a few rows here, a few rows there, on top on those distributions here. So you use it for staging databases most of the time because you don't know what you're going to do with this data. So you were going to use this because you don't have a good candidate column for hash, or you have too much data to put it in replicate. I'm going to talk after. So you don't have anything that you can do much with this data. You just want to store this data in SQL Server. I would say the SQL Dedicated Pool here. The replicate, what it's going to do, this is for your dimensions. So the replicate is going to copy your dimension in memory on top of the all of the compute nodes here. So what will happen is that every time you join a fact with a dimension, it's like I join my sales data with my customer data or with my product data, it's going to be very fast because the data is replicated. It doesn't have to move from one disk to another, one machine to another here. So the data is already present on the disk, so it's very fast. So the table is good for the table that has non-frequent insert, because every time that you modify your insert, update, delete into your dimensions, it's going to have to refresh to redistribute the data on all of the nodes. But basically for dimensions, this is the best distribution to use. I use it with dimension, that pretty large dimension, up to 300,000 rows. With DW, use something like 200 DW, which is a small one, and I was able to have a very good performance here. Hash distribution, you want to minimize the movement for large tables. This is where it's going to cost you a lot of, in terms of performance, it's going to cost you a lot. Because, you know, dimension, you have a few thousand rows, you have a few tens of thousand rows, even 100,000 rows. Synapse is, the SQL pool is performant enough to move this data quite fast. But if you have for large tables here, table size that is more than 2 GB here, and that has frequent updates, insert and delete, you want to make sure that you're going to distribute your data using a hash function. Hash function might be that the most of the time that I use this data, I'm using the date, client, and product. So I'm going to say hash using those 3 columns, and it's going to distribute it based on the date, based on the product, based on the client here in a way that it can find it. It's like a big index that you're putting on top of your database. It's not even. You can see that I have here a larger chunk here compared to here. But it doesn't matter because Synapse will know where to go to get your data. So all I want to say is that you have a lot of distribution here, but it's not meant for your small data warehouse, right? It's meant for millions, if not billions, of rows of data. The SQL Dedicated Pool. If you have less data than that, you have fact tables with less than 1 million of rows or something like that, use a regular Azure SQL database. It's going to cost you less. You have also the concept of workload management. Here, you want to cap the resources used by a specific group, like the regular users, right? You want to make sure that they don't have a query that is going to use all of the power of your distributions, right? So you're going to be able to have we call it workload classes. I'm going to show that to you later here. And also, you can also assign priority to your application of users. If the CEO of your company has a query, a report that you want to refresh it, he wants to run it, he wants to run it fast, it's going to have priority on top of the other. So on top of the regular employees or analysts. Basically we use it for ETL process. So you want to make sure that the ETL process has priority on top of everything. If you refresh your star schema many times per day, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to refresh it properly, because let's say that you refresh the data once per hour, and your ETL might take something like 45 to 50 minutes. You don't want your ETL to wait for queries to execute. So queries will execute using the latest data that they have, right? When they say execute your query, but your ETL will have precedence on top of it. So the resources of your of Synapse will be on the ETL. So the query might be slower for users, but your ETL will be able to perform in 45 to 50 minutes. You don't want your ETL to take too long, because if you refresh your data once per hour, if it takes 1 hour and 5 minutes, you might have contention there with your ETL.
And this is something that we're missing in serverless, right?
Yep.
Because you cannot cap the users.
You cannot cap it, and you miss it with a lot of tools. So this is something that is, I would say, unique to Synapse.
Mm-hmm.
This part here. Now I thought about a lot of things. How can you optimize it? How can you do? So it might be tricky what distribution we have to use. So Microsoft created the Power BI report that helps you to identify what are the caveats that you have. Let me show it to you. Perfect. This is the Power BI report. It's for another. It's for a database here. It tells me. Let me maybe make it bigger here. Table with issues. So basically, it's going to tell me that I'm missing some stats here in my table, or the stats are updated. So some tables, they don't have Synapse stats at all, right? And others have outdated statistics. So it's from a star schema. You can see dim here, dimensions here. And this thing here, it tells you, first of all, it's free. You have it from GitHub. This is the link the link is on the presentation here. It's going to explain you the best practice analyzer report here, what you can do with it. So the issue tables is going to show you all the tables that you have here. So it's for so it will tell you, yeah, you have 6 cluster cornerstone indexes, heap and stuff like this. It's the compression that you apply to your data here. You have four table with issues, and they're going to tell you the data that you have there. The latest update was that date here. The other one we don't have anything because they were created, but they were created create a select. So it's going to give you, after that I can select a table here. For some reason I don't have it, but usually I can select a table and I can see the table name, the solution policy, and I can see I'm missing outdated stats. I can filter on all of this here, and every time that you have something, they are going to explain you what they are looking for. And the workload management, this is where I wanted to go here. So workload management, look here. Do you see small RC, medium RC, large RC, X large RC? It gives you the request. You can take something like 3 to 25% of the compute of your data here, of your the compute of your Synapse here. In that case of the X large, you can take 70%. This one is your ETL. This one is your regular user. Medium RC might be for your CEO that want to see his data. So this is dynamic. It means that if the more I'm going to beef up my SQL pool, right? So going to DW100 to 6,000 per se, it's going to take that amount of memory. So we assign it with roles to users. So the thing is, you can have also static ones. So static will always take here. We always take 24%, right? Static 20 will always take 48% here. So you can assign and you can modify those kind of statistics here. So this is all the control that you have. If you don't do anything by default, it's going to use the small RC, which is okay. You will not be in trouble. Then after that, the request mismatch, I don't think I have data for that here. And external table, I have only one table. It tells me where it is. And basically, I don't have any problem with that. It's just the description of this table. So basically, this is the report that Microsoft gives to us. If I go back to the presentation, demo Azure Synapse Studio. Is it me or you, Michelle? You want to do it?
Well, I think we already we've already shown, but I
just want to show here.
Just
the Lake database. Yeah, the Lake database here. You see the SQL database that Michelle was using. You have the Lake database. Just to show you one thing, I queried this data before. It's the product dimension that Michelle was talking about. She did it with a view. I queried this data before, and it took not even 1 second to run here. So I can repeat this, and it's going to be pretty fast too. This time took 3 seconds. We needed to wake up the compute. You see, 1 second, 3 seconds. It's not very slow here.
And also in SSMS, if you do this, so you also get the message. Around the megabytes and.
Yeah. So this is basically what you can do with it. And people ask me questions about pipelines. So you can copy the pipeline here. So you can have your pipeline. You can have your data flow with all kinds of transformation. I don't think I did a lot here. So you see the address. So we can do all. This is how we are going to load our data lakehouse, basically.
And you can either use ADF or that, but if you don't have to spin up ADF if you want to use the Synapse pipelines, right?
Yeah, because everything is integrated. Data Factory, more or less, is integrated in Synapse. So yeah, this is basically.
You want to maybe show the monitoring a little bit? I don't know if you have anything to show.
I don't think I have. I don't think I have.
Yeah.
To show. February
so
15,
basically
we had
here,
a lot, but.
Yeah, so here you can view the pipeline runs and how much each pipeline ran, if it failed or succeeded. So it's the same as Azure Data Factory if you have experience with that.
Yeah, and here I don't think we have any notebooks, but we could do notebooks here for if we were using Spark. This is where we're going to we would go to create notebooks. So basically, it's one place where you can do almost everything in one place, because you can even have a link to I'm looking for it, a link to where's it Power BI. I'm looking for Power BI, not here. Should be a develop. No, anyway, we can have a link to Power BI somewhere here. Anyway, I don't remember precisely where it is, but then you can have you can develop your reports inside of the Synapse Studio. That's very powerful. Okay, back to the presentation. Okay. Yeah, Azure Synapse Studio, unified platform to access your data. You can navigate, upload, analyze. Yeah, I didn't show it, but you can upload a file, a CSV file, directly from Synapse and do a query on top of it. You can parse it, like Michel showed you before, using standard SQL. And you can use it in conjunction with Data Lake table to do your analysis. Here, the tool set that we have, we can import any available data using the import assistant. This is something that's kind of a wizard that helps you to import data here, analyze using SQL, and you can report with Power BI. Do we have any questions? In the chat, no? I can see the chat here.
Somebody is writing, so let's wait.
Ah, perfect. Let's wait. Let's be patient. Yes, you can use the Parquet file with the dedicated pool, but it's going to be an external table. It's not. It will not be part of the 60G solution that I showed you before. It will be an external table. The dedicated pool is basically a database. So you need to import your data there.
So yeah, same like serverless.
Yep. No. It's Azure SQL Datawarehouse. I don't know if you might be too young for that, but yeah, Azure SQL Datawarehouse. Yeah. Became Synapse. Yeah, because I was about to say if you heard about parallel data warehouse that we had on-prem. So they use that parallel data warehouse to create Azure SQL data warehouse, and then they use after.
Okay, so you mentioned MPP didn't auto scale for the apps, bricks, etc. that do scale. How long to spin up before the auto scale completes?
MPP for apps, the bricks itself, auto scale. Oh, it depends. It depends because now with Databricks you have serverless clusters. It depends. With Microsoft, it takes something like it might be in seconds or a minute. So it depends what type of machine you use. If you use a cluster with GPU inference, right, a very large cluster, it would take much more time because it has to start a big machine. And it depends how much you start at the same time. Usually, autoscale might be used, but you have a penalty hit when you use it. So it's easier to say, I'm going to spin up my, I know I will need 3 machines maximum or 8 machines maximum. I need to start them off, do my work, and shut them down after, instead of relying on autoscale. Autoscale works with serverless, though. This is what serverless is using. So when you wait for your first query, it's because it's spinning up machines. Right? I guess we... Perfect. Right? We don't have any more questions, Michelle? Or someone is typing?
Yeah, somebody's typing.
Perfect.
We have 10 minutes left, so it's only 11:20 for us.
Yeah, come on.
Can you show how to connect from Power BI? Do you have a Power BI spinned?
Power BI. Let me just check. Yeah, let me just spin the Power BI and show it to you. It will not be long. Power BI desktop. You mean to connect to the serverless pool? Just wait for my Power.
Yeah, to the serverless, and if you have desktop, you have Power BI desktop.
Yeah, I'm just spinning it from now. Okay, it's always longer when you do presentations. Right, it's going to start. All right, let me just get data here. If I can move it to my machine. Let me share my other screen. Wasting Teams here. Let me share the screen here. So you can see my screen here. So basically, I'm waiting for the get data to appear. It's going to happen, and then here. You see, now I'm going to say Azure here. I'm going to say Azure SQL Database. No Synapse. Yeah, if I type Synapse here, right? Synapse, I'll take SQL, and this is for the Lake database here, or I can connect to, I'm using, because it's a SQL, it's a standard database, I'm using Azure SQL, but Azure, Michelle, what are you using? Synapse Have Analytics?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Let's use it. Synapse to connect to your serverless pool.
Yeah, it's
perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do it. Let me get the connection string here.
So the direct query is sometimes, so it's sometimes I create views to connect instead of direct query. I cannot see your screen well. Just a second.
No, direct query here. Oh no, but direct query here, you can create view, but direct query will go directly to the database. Whereas,
yes.
let me just. I'm just looking for the database name. It's database. Sales, man. Thank you,
yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
Merci, Michelle. So.
Au revoir.
Sales, perfect. Okay, so here you have the import. It's going to copy the data into, because Power BI is a queue, right? So it's going to import the data into its queue, into its storage, into Power BI storage. Query will be blazingly fast when you have the import mode. Here, direct query, every time you want to query data, it's going on the database. Direct query is good if you assign for I would say for a SQL dedicated pool, you assign row level security. So you want to get the same security. It's going to use my ID to connect to it. If I do import, I will need to refresh the data periodically in Power BI.
Yeah,
So
but
let's
the import
connect
is going to be faster, right? You don't have to
yeah, of
refresh
course,
every time.
Yeah, yeah, of course. What else? Yeah, here, use my current credential? No. Microsoft account, sign in.
So the question about dedicated pool. So the query in dedicated pool can be fast, but maybe not the Power BI itself, because Power BI waits for the data, and so it may, depending on how much data you're importing. So let's say
yeah, but it will be as fast as the query I did on the dedicated pool, Michelle.
Yeah, well, but it's the Power BI sometimes is slow.
Yeah, it depends. It depends.
Depending on how. So when we try to import millions of rows, it took time.
Do you have a star schema?
Yeah.
With the SQL pool? With the SQL
yes,
pool?
and it took, so, well, with millions of rows, it took between 3 and 5 minutes tops. But I'm guessing that if you have more.
To import or just to do a query?
To import and to do a query.
Okay. Depends how your system is. There is a lot of things, because sometimes it might be very fast. I'm just saying, trying to.
I'm thinking that premium will be faster. If you're doing desktop, it's going to take more.
It depends where you are. Yeah, the desktop, because you're bringing the data on your machine.
To your laptop, exactly.
That's why. But if you're Power BI service, it might be premium.
It should be faster. Yeah.
Yeah, because the data is already in Azure. So now I'm finally connected to this database. Now you see everything that has been created there. I can access to it. I can say bring everything. I use direct query and load. It's going to load it to my Power BI desktop model.
And you don't have a lot of data. Let's see how much time it takes.
Oh, here it's always longer because it has to get the metadata and the data at the same time. Try to find the relationships. So it's probably desktop is not the best experience for that. And if you have millions of rows, billions of rows, you have to filter, because it's going to try to bring all of the rows on your machine. It's different than when you have a report and then you do a query, and then the report would do a query with the parameters. And now you see, this is how I can connect to it. I don't have any relationship because it's a serverless pool. If it was the dedicated pool, it will have seen the relationship and do it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
so, but I do recommend, if you have a lot of data, to just refresh on a regular basis. The Power BI, like move the data to the Power BI.
Yep. And now, Michelle, let's see what you did. So.
Oops.
Yeah. So yeah, perfect. Anyway, so this is how we connect. I don't know if it answers the question. Stop sharing. Where's my team? Here. Yes, we can connect to the dedicated pool the same way. Same thing.
Same way, and Azure SQL.
Yeah, the only thing that changed, let me show that to you. Dedicated pool versus serverless pool. Let me share my other screen. It'd be nice if Teams allows us to switch screen easily. So here, if I go to here, the only thing that changes here, you see, this is my dedicated SQL endpoint. The only thing that they added is the dash on demand. This is the only difference. And now I'm connecting to the serverless endpoint here.
Vladimir asks if you can try it. He doesn't believe us.
Get data. Let me just get data.
With direct query? Okay, with direct query.
Yeah, I'm just trying to connect to Power BI now. We'll show it after. So servers. database is, in that case, database will be SQL Lakehouse and direct query.
You may want to share the Power BI.
I will. I'm just trying to make sure that I can sign in first, because here, as soon as I'm signing in, I'm going to share it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay, let me just share my screen here. You see, oops, I lost it. Let me just unshare, share my other screen. Okay, so you can see I'm connected to my pool here. And now it's going to, I can bring a few table here, load. Now it's going to query the data here. Yes, of course. Evaluating. So creating a shot to the model. And if I go here, they should be somewhere. Yeah, DW dim address. Here they are. A different color, but as you can see, it was much faster to bring those tables than to bring the rest.
But how many rows do they have? A lot or just 1,000?
The same as you have.
Okay.
It's the same source, Michelle.
Yeah.
Same source.
Try to browse data.
Now it's Michelle request now.
No, it's Vladimir.
No? Okay. Yeah, you see? Pipeline run ID, which is not relevant for this. It's quite fast.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Are you satisfied, Vladimir? Yeah, much faster. True.
Yeah, it is. Much
So
faster.
he's satisfied.
Good. And I have a DW 100C, yeah? So I have the smallest synapse possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you don't have a lot of data.
I know. So that's why. But even if I had lots of data, we have, Michelle, a big table that we created for demo before with 10 million rows. It was quite fast too. So let's stop sharing the screen. Can we stop? Where is the Teams meeting? Okay, perfect. All right.
The import, we are using import if in case we have like a huge data set and we don't want to wait, so you can do it on a schedule, right?
Yeah, it's always faster to use the import, always faster. The thing with import is going to copy the data in the Power BI. And if you add row level security in your database, you need to replicate that same security in your Power BI because you're copying the data.
Mm-hmm.
Power BI uses the same storage account, yes. Yes, they do at some point, but it's not the same. I would say it will not use the same. If my dimension that I showed before, the address will not be the same. It will not be shared by Power BI. It's going to be two different. We're copying the data in Power BI. Yes, Power BI can use blob storage or Data Lake Gen 2 with special cache underneath. Because Power BI, to be as fast as that, it's because they put your data in memory all the time. So that's why you have a limitation on the data set that you can have there. 10 gigabytes or 100, I think now with the premium, but premium you are paying for it. I don't remember the size of the maximum data set you get. I think it's 400 gigabytes now you can have. Well, no limit. You have a limit on the size of the data that you have in Power BI.
Yeah, I thought it was like 1 terabyte, 10 gigabytes.
No. Gigabytes, 1 gigabyte for Power
Per
BI
workspace.
service. Yeah, Power BI service. Yeah, the storage data there, but
you have 100 terabyte storage limit.
In Power BI Premium now?
Yeah, so 10 gigabytes per workspace.
Okay.
And then you have 100 terabytes storage limit.
So you were limited with the workspace and data set that you can have. And it's all in memory. It's all in memory, but still you have limitation. You cannot be unlimited. Like you cannot have 1 petabyte in Power BI, right? So, but you could have 1 petabyte in SQL Database Pool. Yes, in this case, yes. If you directory, you're okay. But I thought we were talking about import here. All right. So do we have any other question or comment? Yeah. No need to import. Great. I understand. But I was talking about, yeah, it's fast. I know it's fast. It depends of the model that you have, depends on the distribution. If you did your homework, it will be fast. If you didn't do your homework, it will be slow like anything.
But Vladimir, I will give you an example from a client that I have. They have to come in the morning and be able to have something like 100 reports for different users. So what we were doing is that we had to prepare the data beforehand so that the users will be able to just get the reports right away.
Yeah, I agree with Serverless Pool. You should import unless you have real-time data that you want to show.
Yeah, you're right. We use serverless.
Yeah.
Maybe with dedicated, it would have been so.
Yeah, but the Dedicated Pool has a price too, huh? So it's not the same thing. So if you want to be fast, if you want to, it depends what you're doing. I think what you had, Michelle, was not a star schema. So it was something different. But the Dedicated Pool has a price for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very expensive, but compared to Power BI Premium, sometimes you will say, what's the best, right?
Yeah.
So yep. Yes, in memory, but not petabytes. All right. Okay, I guess here, just I think we're done, Michelle. Let me just
yes.
Right.
So Steve, would you like to?
Sure, I can take over and do the raffle. I think
sure.
I didn't expect so many questions, so this is great.
Yeah. I have one more slide that I want to show Steve.
Sure, go ahead.
One last, promise. It's a Michelle is laughing. It's a small slide here saying thank you.
He has a sense of humor.
Okay, Steve, you can take the control.
Okay. This session is recorded and it will be published on YouTube and Rumble once it's all published. Thank you everyone for joining our online meeting today. Christian and Michelle, thank you for your session. With that, thank you and have a great day and see you here in the next meeting.
Right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for the great presentation. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.